The third person we meet next is a man called Jacob, and this man is really a piece of work. As the Bible shows us the life of Jacob, it tells us what not to do, contrary of what it has been telling us so far. With the lives of four leaders of tribes, Abraham, Isaac, and Joseph, the Bible tells us that having faith like Abraham is a wonderful thing, and living like Isaac and Joseph is what we can strive to achieve. When it comes to Jacob, it's like what not to follow after, is what. The author of the book illustrated what God wanted to show us with Jacob's life, and surprisingly Jacob's story is the longest of them all. It is also a complicated life story. Jacob was a man who could not take things simply as they are, and he was always scheming for something more, which resulted in making things unnecessarily more difficult for him. Out of the four tribe leaders in the book of Genesis, Jacob lived the most difficult life, and he was total opposite of his father Isaac and his grandfather Abraham in every aspect. For one, there was no such thing as yielding in Jacob's dictionary. He also liked to make quarrel as he fought with his older brother even from the inside of their mother womb. It, in fact, made their mother Rebekah so uncomfortable and painful that she asked God what was going on. God comforted her in his response, saying, "Two nations are in your womb, and the older will serve the younger. Hang in there." So she hung in there until the time came to give birth. After the birth, though, she no longer had any more baby because she had had it. Who was it to blame? It wasn't Esau's fault, but Jacob's. Esau was rather a simple, clumsy and down-to-earth type of a guy. He was active, but did not like to argue over small matters, gave things up easily, and because of his nature, sometimes things were taken from him. Jacob was not like Esau. Their mother's womb was small, and in that small space two were there. He kept on kicking and jostling to a point Rebekah did not want to go through that again. Sometime later Jacob bought the birthright of Esau with a bowl of red stew. My guess is that once he bought the birthright from Esau, he would not have treated Esau as his older brother anymore. Esau and Jacob are what's known as the fraternal twins, right? They are unlike in body shapes, skin tones, and personalities. Nothing is alike. They are twins, nonetheless, the fraternal twins. In the end Jacob conspires with his mother, and taking advantage of Isaac's poor eyesight, steals Isaac's blessing for Esau. This enrages Esau, and no matter how easy-going and generous his usual demeanor might have been, and he bursts out with a loud and bitter cry. To escape from Esau's rage, Jacob flees to Paddan Aram, and by now he was already 70 years old. When you read this part in the Bible, you typically assume that Jacob's age to be around 15 or not older than 20 years old, right? People generally think so. According to my calculation, however, Jacob was about 70 years old when he fled to Paddan Aram. Shall we see how this is? We can backtrack from Joseph's age when he was sold to Egypt as a slave, and he was 17 years old. When Joseph entered the service of Pharaoh king of Egypt, he was 30 years old. I suppose his title was a Prime Minister of Egypt. After he became the Prime Minister of Egypt, there were 7 years of abundance, which would make Joseph 37 years old. His father and brothers all came to Egypt during the second year of famine, and this would make Joseph 39 years old. When Joseph was 39 years old, Pharaoh meets Jacob and asks him how old he was, and he said he was 130 years old. Then what is the age difference between Jacob and Joseph? It's about 90 years, right? How long was Jacob in Paddan Aram? He was there for 20 years. He left Paddan Aram shortly after Joseph was born. So he was 71 years old when he fled from Esau and came to Paddan Aram. He wasn't even married at that age. How peculiar and nasty his personalities were, no one was willing to give their daughter in marriage. Perhaps Jacob and his mother knew that staying home would not improve Jacob's chance of getting married. So to escape the burning rage of Esau and to seek a woman to marry, Jacob was sent to Paddan Aram where his uncle Laban lived. When Jacob came to Laban's house, he fell in love with one of Laban's daughters, Rachel, because she was beautiful. Jacob loved Rachel and wanted to marry her. So they had a wedding party, and after the first night together, he saw that he was tricked into marrying Leah, Rachel's sister, instead. If you trick people, in the end you will be tricked too. A man reaps what he plants. So Jacob, who was already 70 years old, tending his uncle's herd, and fell in love with his uncle's second daughter Rachel. He proposed to his uncle that he would work for him for 7 years for marrying Rachel, only to realize after the first night of the marriage, the woman he married was, in fact, Leah. So Jacob went and complained to his uncle, but what was done could not be undone. I suppose that Laban did not think of Jacob so highly, for he agreed to give his daughter to Jacob for working for 7 years. Jacob nonetheless loved Rachel and worked for his uncle for 7 years as if those years were nothing but a few days to him. In the end, he managed to have 2 wives, and the first wife, Leah, although she might not have been as beautiful as Rachel, she was the real deal. She was a kind and good woman. She never once made a complaint to her husband, and she was fairly optimistic in dealing with matters. She did not receive much love and affection that were rightfully due to her from her husband, but she always had faith and hope. You can see that by how she names her children. When she had her first son, she named him Reuben and said, "The Lord has seen her misery." But Jacob did not change his demeanor towards her and still favored to Rachel. Leah did not become angry and jealous by it. She was comforted by her son, and when she had her second son, she named him Simeon. She said that the Lord heard my prayers. Although her husband still would not come to her and cause her nothing but loneliness, God heard her prayers. Had the third son and named him Levi, and thought that her husband would surely become attached to her now. She still had faith and hope. She believed, while yearning for love, and she endured, while becoming more patient. In her patience, she keeps naming her sons in positive ways, right? She named her fourth son Judah, saying she will praise the Lord. She gave their sons good names, while her husband remained in Rachel's tent and gave her more grief. You should not judge a book by its cover, and Leah was just the person for the phrase. She was kind and good, a bit naive but optimistic, and patient. It would have been better if good things were divided evenly among the 2 sisters, but unfortunately it wasn't the case. It's like if someone has a good character, the person's appearance doesn't quite match the character, and if someone's appearance is good, then the person's character doesn't quite match the appearance, not always, but in general. Jacob ended up spending 6 years tending his uncle's herd and 14 years for his 2 wives, totaling 20 years in Paddan Aram. He had quite a lot of children from Leah, and Rachel became jealous of her sister and complained to Jacob to give her children. Yes, Jacob loved Rachel, but he couldn't take this complaint of hers and became angry with her. He told her, "Am I in the place of God? He kept you from having children, and what am I to do about it?" This one time, though, Reuben found some mandrake plants, and this particular plant was believed to have the ability to help women get pregnant. I personally do not know how much of that is true, but it seemed that people used to believe in it. And it would have been nice if Rachel was the one who found it, but a son of Leah found it and brought it to Leah. Rachel saw this and asked Leah to give some of the plant to her, and in return she would send Jacob to Leah's tent. She was making a trade deal. Rachel was so desperate to have a baby of her own, God took a pity on her and opened her womb. So Rachel became pregnant and gave birth to Joseph. Jacob had other sons from both Leah and Rachel's servant women, as well. There were some discrepancies and disagreements between Jacob and his uncle Laban concerning Jacob's wages. It looked like Laban changed Jacob's wages whenever he wanted, and sometimes did not even pay him, probably. Laban, however, wasn't like this initially. He was a good man before. Long before, when the servant of Abraham, Eliezer of Damascus, came to his house and told him about the affair concerning finding a wife for Isaac, he said, "This is from Lord, we can say nothing to you one way or another." He had faith, but he was changed after Jacob came to his house. Jacob is no easy person to deal with, and they were both looking at each other with doubts and suspicions, I'm sure of, and in the end, they became experts in dealing with each other. Laban changed Jacob's wages 10 times. Of all people's wages, he changed Jacob's wages 10 times. One way or another, Laban had become worse than Jacob. A good man makes the people around him good or better, as well, and in the same way, a bad man makes the people around him bad or worse. That is the human nature. We live together and become alike, whether good or bad. If you look at an old married couple who have been together for 20 or 30 years, they are alike in many things, both aspects of good and bad. So when we look at Jacob and Laban's relationship, we can clearly see that the bad side is a lot more influential and powerful than the good side. It wasn't the case where Laban's good side affected Jacob and Jacob became good, but Jacob's bad side affected Laban more and they both became untrusting men. When God looked at these two, though, Jacob received the worse end of the deal, as Laban acted much worse and harsher. Jacob literally goes above and beyond to get his share from his uncle Laban after he's been cheated so many times. He was determined to get what was owed to him from his uncle, who is also his father-in-law. When the two decides to have a rule in deciding what is Jacob's and what is Laban's, Jacob says that he will only take the sheep with speckles and spots and the ones without will belong to Laban. Then look at the show Jacob is putting on afterwards. He takes the branches of poplar, almond trees, peel them off to make them look spotty and places them in front of the flocks as they mate. All because Laban had been so unreasonable and unfair with Jacob. God took a pity on Jacob and allowed his flocks to increase more than Laban's. Jacob wasn't a young man with vigor and youth when he came to Laban. He was already 70 years old when he came to Laban. He got married and had to work 14 years for his 2 wives, and the next 6 years he saw his wages changed, for the worst 10 times. In God's eyes, Jacob looked mighty poor. Jacob finally thinks that he has had it with Laban and it is a waste of time spending another day under his uncle's roof. He tells his wives, "Your father is both my uncle and my father-in-law, but he has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. I am leaving him." His 2 wives Leah and Rachel both agree with Jacob and leave with him. Daughters. So they flee, and they flee overnight like thieves. They don't even say their farewells. Despite the unfair treatment and hardships, the place Jacob had spent 20 years of his life is both his wife's home and his uncle's house. But the old man, who is 90 years old now, doesn't even say goodbye and runs away overnight from the place where he has spent the last 20 years. Jacob, his 2 wives and his sons flee quietly. They, in fact, flee so unnoticeably, Laban does not even realize that they were gone until 3 days later. When Laban was told that they fled, he was like, "What?" and then began pursuing them. It took him 7 days to catch up to Jacob, and it was quite the distance to cover. Laban had almost caught up with Jacob, and the way he followed them, it was indeed with murderous intent. Then God appeared to him in his dream and said, "You do not say anything to Jacob, either good or bad, okay? It is bad blood between Jacob and Laban, right?" God is saying to Laban not to say anything, either good or bad. God isn't saying to Laban why he is pursuing a good man, he says to him not to say anything, either good or bad. The way Jacob carries himself is anything but holy, he acts like a pathetic man, indeed. Look what he is showing to his sons by escaping from his uncle without a word. It's not very educational for the children to witness what he's doing. So Laban finally catches up to Jacob and says, "These are my daughters and my grandchildren, but what can I do about them? But why did you steal my gods?" Jacob had no idea that Rachel had stolen the gods. Jacob tells Laban that he did not steal his gods, and Laban looks for them. Rachel hides them inside her camel's saddle and sits on them. When Laban enters her tent to look for it, she tells him she is having her period and thus is not able to stand. So Laban ends up not finding his gods and turns around to go back home. Before he leaves, he and Jacob set up a stone pillar and make a pact not to come across the line and harm the other party. This is the pact between the father-in-law and the son-in-law. They're not making a pact to help each other, but not to harm the other party. After Jacob and Laban went separate ways, Jacob arrived to the river Jabbok, which means he is nearing the land where Esau lives. To find out what Esau is up to, Jacob sends a few messengers ahead of him. When the messengers returned, the news they brought with them terrified Jacob. They said that Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men of his. When Jacob heard 400 men, he no longer could move forward because he was so afraid. So he sent his herds ahead of him and also sent his wives and sons across the ford of the Jabbok, only he remained alone on the opposite side of the river. And he did something he had never done in his life, an all-night prayer. He, of course, had no idea what he was doing. He was probably just throwing dirt in the air, and shouting and yelling. When God looked at what he was doing, it looked strange and weird. So he sent an angel down to investigate. When the angel came and said hello, Jacob saw it as an opportunity because all night he had cried and prayed for something, and here came the answer, he thought. So he grabbed on to the angel. See, this angel had no idea what kind of a man Jacob was. You cannot just approach him like a normal person, for he has a gift in holding. This inexperienced angel, probably, got caught now. What typically happens when a normal person sees an angel is he either faints or falls down to the ground with fear, but not Jacob. He grabs onto the angel and won't let go. The angel is startled by Jacob's action and tells Jacob to let go. What does Jacob say to this? Not until you bless me. He's just like some people I know, bless me. Bless me. Well, Jacob won't let go of the angel, no matter how much the angel begs. It is actually not a matter of blessing, but Jacob won't hear of it unless he gets the blessing. Words will not persuade the man. Have you ever heard of an angel striking a man? Well, Jacob was so unrelenting and would not ease his grip on the angel had no choice but to strike Jacob. In fact, the angel struck Jacob so hard that his hip joint came out of the place. Still, Jacob would not let go. So the angel asked what his name was, and Jacob said, "My name is Jacob. Some name you have." The angel says, and Jacob is still holding on to the angel. The angel says, "The sun is coming up and I have to go to the morning briefing now. Let me go." But Jacob will not change his mind. "Bless me," he says. The real reason why the angel came to Jacob was to deliver a message. "You foolish man. Do not be afraid and go across the Jabbok. Your brother Esau isn't like you and does not hold grudge. His heart is not like yours, and he will not hold you accountable for what you did to him 20 years ago. And don't you remember God's promise to you at Bethel when you were leaving your father's house? God promised you that he would be with you wherever you went. If God wasn't with you, Laban would have killed you a long time ago. No one will hurt you, so go across the Jabbok, you pathetic man." This was what the angel was going to say, but Jacob did not give him a chance to deliver the message. Jacob just held on to the angel and kept asking for the blessing. And as we can see, no matter what the angel did, Jacob would not hear. So the angel blessed him, but the Bible doesn't say what the blessing was about. The angel just blessed him with whatever and ran out of there as soon as Jacob loosened his grip. Now Jacob crosses the Jabbok to meet Esau. Esau, indeed, isn't like Jacob. He, in fact, has already forgotten the incident 20 years ago. Sometimes I hear other pastors say that because the angel blessed Jacob that Esau's heart was softened. Look at the stories before and after, either Laban or Esau could harm Jacob. In fact, no one could. People who do not look at before and after what happened tend to say things like that. In any case, when Esau finally came and saw things with his own eyes, the flock of sheep and goats, as well as the women and children looked all right, but Jacob, he was covered in dirt from head to toe, and looked like someone had beaten him up. Imagine that. Jacob had traveled a long way from Paddan Aram, could not sleep the night before, rolled around in dirt and hair was all messed up, his eyes were bloodshot, and limped as he came up to Esau to greet him. What a pathetic sight Jacob must have made. So when Esau saw his brother in such a form, he must have asked Jacob just who it was that made him look like this, and what could Jacob say to that? He couldn't say that an angel beat him up. The angel was gone now, and Jacob sure thought that Esau would decimate him and his family, but as it turned out, things weren't like that at all. Instead, Esau offered him to accompany him as a protection, but Jacob was scheming again. It had truly been a long time since the last time these two brothers had seen each other, so right now everything seems as smooth as silk. But after the welcome dust has settled, and if Esau were to bring up what had happened 20 years ago, it would put Jacob in a very uncomfortable situation. So Jacob urges Esau to go on ahead of him. He uses his children and herds as an excuse and tells Esau that if they traveled together, all of Jacob's animals would die. He was still afraid of Esau, but Esau was just trying to be nice to his brother and look out for him. So Esau offers Jacob to leave some of his men with him to protect him, but in Jacob's head, he doesn't know what Esau's men might hear and tell Esau as they accompany him and his family. So Jacob insists that Esau does not leave any of his men with him. Oh, and all of the droves met earlier that day. Esau asks Jacob what they were, and Jacob tells him they were his gift to Esau, as he says, "To find favor in your eyes, my lord." Esau tells Jacob that he already has plenty, but Jacob insists that Esau accept them. This way, Esau can't say anything later on. In the end, Esau left Jacob and his family, feeling sorry for the man, and as for Jacob, he should have gone on with Esau that day. If he had, then the misfortune that soon fell on his house could have been averted. There was a daughter of Jacob and her name was Dinah. When Jacob took his family to Shechem, she went out to see the girls in that town. You know, girls like to play with girls, so that's what she did. And when she was out, a man named Shechem son of Hamor saw her, then took her and violated her. Dinah's brothers Simeon and Levi later learned this incident later and were furious. Shechem and Hamor both came to Jacob and asked for Dinah in a marriage, for Shechem wanted to marry Dinah. They told Jacob and his sons that they were willing to do anything that Jacob and his sons might propose. And the sons of Jacob deceive Shechem and Hamor in reply. They tell Shechem and Hamor if their men are circumcised like Jacob and his sons, then Shechem can marry Dinah. This was a lie, but Shechem and Hamor believed it. So every man in Shechem got circumcised. 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, Simeon and Levi attacked the city and killed every male in the city. Jacob was not aware of it, and without telling their father, Simeon and Levi had done this terrible thing. From then on, Jacob cursed both of them until he died. He curses them for their anger and fury. They both were Jacob's sons, and Jacob did not forgive them, not even from his own deathbed, because they made him a stench to the Canaanites and Perizzites. Instead of making a stench of the faith, they made a stench of blood, and Jacob felt deeply ashamed by it. With a rumor going about Jacob and his sons like this, no one is willing to give their daughters to Jacob's sons in marriage. Jacob's first son Reuben has well past his youth and is getting old, unmarried. He could not suppress his passion, and one day Jacob has learned that Reuben has slept with his concubine Bilhah, who is technically Reuben's stepmother. What could Jacob do after hearing the news? He could neither kill nor do anything to him. This was his firstborn. And the other sons Simeon and Levi are of fiery anger and fury. They are the cursed one in Jacob's eyes. His daughter has been violated. His firstborn has slept with his concubine. This is the life of Jacob. Not a day goes by without hearing the bad news. You know how it sometimes feels that when bad things happen, it just doesn't happen once, but come in multiple. Well, Rachel was not content with just Joseph, so she wished for another son. She actually named Joseph with such a yearning, as the name's meaning suggests, "May the Lord add to me another son." So she had another son, and that was Benjamin. Rachel, though, died during giving birth to Benjamin. Jacob loved Rachel, and the beautiful Rachel was his beloved and comfort. But now that Rachel has died, what was to be Jacob's comfort? If anything, it would be better if the baby died and the mother lived, but the baby lived and the mother died. Now the baby was crying, and with the mother gone, the other women who were jealous of Rachel because Jacob only loved her now had to take care of the baby. This was Jacob's life, and it was difficult. Oh, how he would have liked it if the misfortunes ended there, but no. When Benjamin was just old enough to wean, Joseph talked to everyone about the strange and unpleasant dream he had, which we all know will separate Joseph from Jacob for years. Now, Jacob has been keeping Joseph at home and from working, while all of Joseph's older brothers were out in the field, working their sweat off. Their father has been heavily favoring Joseph above all others and giving him the best things in the house while overly protecting him. In the meantime, others are baking out in the sun day after day. It is clear as to who is on the laboring party and who is not. So how can there be peace in Jacob's house? It is understandable that more care and love have been given to Joseph and Benjamin because they are young and their mother is dead. So considering these factors, it is understandable, indeed, that Jacob is giving Joseph and Benjamin more care than his other sons. But the way Jacob is doing it is simply too much, too obvious, and is too lopsided onto one side. For example, all other older brothers are wearing rags for clothes while Joseph is wearing fancy, colorful robe. Jacob makes it too obvious and doesn't take care to hide it. And this angers other sons and they hate Joseph for it. Everything Jacob does, he does it unfavorably and unpleasantly. This is the reason why his life is always difficult.